For more than a century, Neanderthals have occupied a strange and uneasy place in the human story. They were close enough to us to feel familiar, yet distant enough to remain troubling. They walked upright, crafted tools, buried their dead, cared for the injured, and survived brutal climates that erased countless other species. And yet, something about them never quite fit. Officially, Neanderthals are framed as a branch of humanity, an evolutionary cousin that rose, thrived, and then quietly faded. But that explanation depends on an assumption we rarely question: that Neanderthals must fit neatly into our existing story of earthbound evolution. This segment begins by removing that assumption. Instead, we ask a different question, one anthropology rarely permits itself to ask openly. What if Neanderthals were not simply another human species, but outsiders to Earth's evolutionary system? Not invaders, not conquerors, but something older, quieter, and more accidental. The fossil record tells us Neanderthals appear suddenly, fully formed, with a brain larger than modern humans on average. They did not emerge gradually from some clear transitional population. They arrived already adapted to Ice Age Europe with physiological traits that seem oddly over-engineered: dense bones, extreme cold tolerance, massive sinuses, unique cranial architecture, and muscular efficiency unmatched by Homo sapiens. Evolution usually proceeds through compromise. Neanderthals appear optimized. Their extinction timeline is equally strange. They survived fluctuating ice ages, volcanic winters, and megafauna collapses, but disappeared shortly after extensive contact with modern humans. Not wiped out, not conquered, absorbed, diluted, vanished into our genome in fragments, as though their presence was never meant to persist independently. Then there is their technology. Neanderthal toolmaking was conservative to the point of obsession, perfected, stable, resistant to innovation. This runs counter to what we expect from an intelligent species under pressure. Unless innovation was unnecessary. Unless they already possessed what they needed. In this theory, Neanderthals are not viewed as primitive humans, but as a biological landing party. A population genetically engineered, or selectively adapted, for survival on a harsh, alien world eerily similar to Pleistocene Earth. Extreme cold, thin resources, hostile megafauna, low atmospheric stability. Earth, during Neanderthal emergence, matches that profile disturbingly well. Their physical differences, once dismissed as archaic, may instead reflect adaptations designed elsewhere. High pain tolerance, short, powerful frames, neural wiring that emphasizes spatial awareness over abstraction. A species built for endurance, not expansion. And if this sounds implausible, consider the alternative explanation we accept without hesitation: that a near-identical intelligent species evolved separately from us, interbred successfully, shared symbolic thought, used fire, music, ritual, and then disappeared, without leaving a cultural legacy matching its cognitive capacity. That explanation itself is astonishing. This is not a claim that Neanderthals arrived in spacecraft. It is the suggestion that Earth may not have been their origin point. They may have been introduced, or stranded, or adapting after arrival. In this series, we will not argue that this theory is true. Only that it is not as impossible as we've been taught, and that the silence surrounding the question may say more than the evidence itself. If Segment 1 challenged the assumption that Neanderthals neatly fit into Earth's evolutionary tree, Segment 2 asks a simpler, sharper question. Why does Neanderthal biology look like it was designed for a world harsher than Earth? When scientists reconstructed the first Neanderthal skeletons, they assumed deformity, bent limbs, heavy bones, strange posture. It took decades before researchers accepted the truth. Neanderthals were not deformed humans, humans were gracile Neanderthals. But even after correcting those early errors, the biology remains unsettling. Neanderthals were engineered, either by nature or something else, to survive extremes that no known human lineage ever endured. Their bone density exceeds any comparable hominin. Some long bones approach the structural strength of industrial materials. Their rib cages were deep, barrel-shaped, almost overbuilt, suggesting lungs optimized not just for cold climates but for thin, particulate-rich atmospheres. Then there is their skull. Neanderthal crania bulged backward into elongated occipital buns, structures that may have anchored enhanced visual spatial processing or unconventional neural circuitry. Their eye sockets were large, deep, and forward-facing in a way that seems almost tactical, as though designed for low-light navigation. Simple evolution does not usually produce redundancy. Yet here, redundancy is everywhere: reinforcement, overdevelopment, biological excess. If Neanderthals evolved entirely on Earth, they were shaped by environmental pressures we have no record of. Pressures intense enough to craft a powerhouse organism built more like a specialized survival unit than a mammal drifting through slow genetic drift. Consider their thermal biology. Modern humans struggle in extreme cold even with advanced clothing. Neanderthals thrived in Ice Age winters that would kill us quickly. They possessed fatty acid metabolisms tuned to endurance, bone marrow structures optimized for rapid repair, and nerve distributions suggesting high cold tolerance. Everything about them implies preparation, pre-adaptation for Earth's worst possible climates. Except Earth never reached those extremes consistently enough to require such design. Unless the design was not originally for Earth. Some anthropologists point to convergent evolution, that a harsh Eurasian environment simply shaped a population to Herculean extremes. But Neanderthals appear suddenly, already optimized without the transitional forms we expect. And they maintain their hyper-adapted physiology even during warmer periods when natural selection should have relaxed. A species on autopilot, following directives written long before it touched this planet. Even their children show something odd. Neanderthal juveniles developed differently, skulls expanding rearward early, muscular structure forming sooner, neural development prioritizing perception over abstraction. It's as if their biology was optimizing for tasks unlike ours, tasks involving terrain mapping, resource tracking, or survival under hostile planetary conditions. Some researchers quietly acknowledge this. Neanderthals feel like a population adapted for a specific environment that is not reflected anywhere in Earth's geological record. And in the fringe corners of anthropology, a few whisper that their biology resembles something closer to deployment engineering, as though these beings were built to establish or maintain footholds on alien worlds. Their strange mix of ruggedness and cognitive nuance suggests not a primitive human, but a species forged for survival first, culture second. A species that could withstand whatever harsh frontier they were sent to. A species that, for a time, made Earth that frontier. If Neanderthal biology raises eyebrows, their technology unsettles far more quietly. At first glance, Neanderthal tools appear simple: stone flakes, scrapers, hand axes. For decades, this apparent simplicity was mistaken for incompetence. But closer examination overturned that assumption completely. Neanderthal tools were not crude. They were precise. The Mysterian toolkit, used by Neanderthals for more than 200,000 years, shows extraordinary consistency across vast distances. From Iberia to the Levant, from windswept steppes to alpine caves, the same techniques, angles, and reduction strategies reappear almost unchanged. This is not what we expect from a species under constant environmental pressure. Human tool cultures evolve rapidly. We experiment. We iterate. We chase marginal gains. Neanderthals did not. They perfected a narrow technological bandwidth, and then stopped. Each flake was struck at angles that modern stone knappers describe as ideal. Not good. Not adequate. Ideal. Their Levallois technique, preparing a core so that a single controlled strike yields a perfectly shaped tool, demonstrates a level of forward planning rivaling modern engineering processes. You must visualize the end product before the first strike. Error compounds instantly. There is no improvisation. Neanderthals executed this repeatedly, flawlessly, for tens of thousands of generations. And yet, they did not progress beyond it. No transition to agriculture. No metallurgy. No sprawling material culture. Why would a species capable of such cognitive precision remain technologically still? One explanation is cultural stagnation. Another is conservatism. But a third possibility quietly fits better. They were not inventing tools. They were maintaining a known system. Consider this. Advanced technological civilizations rarely rely on constant innovation at the frontier. They deploy standardized, reliable systems, tools designed to work anywhere, under any conditions with minimal adaptation. Neanderthal tools exhibit exactly these traits. Durable, modular, optimized for repair, effective across ecosystems. Nothing decorative, nothing symbolic for status, just function. Some fringe researchers have compared Neanderthal toolkits to survival loadouts. The minimal equipment necessary to survive indefinitely in hostile environments when resupply is impossible. A stranded population does not innovate wildly. It preserves what works. And there are anomalies. Residue analysis has shown Neanderthals produced complex adhesives, birch tar, requiring precise heat control in low oxygen conditions. This is chemical engineering, not primitive luck. The process demands sustained temperature regulation and multi-step planning with no visible intermediates in the archaeological record. It appears suddenly, already mastered. Then there is the absence of technological escalation. Neanderthals lived alongside early Homo sapiens for thousands of years. They observed our ornaments, pigments, and experimental tools. They rarely adopted them, as though they saw no reason to. In this theory, Neanderthal technology reflects a civilization that once possessed greater tools, but lost access to them. Their stone industry was not a beginning. It was a fallback. Tools suitable for a population that knew more than it could remember, and remembered more than it could replace. Modern humans are storytellers by compulsion. We fill silence with myth. We animate the unknown with gods, spirits, symbols, and rituals. Every human society, no matter how isolated, produces narrative excess. Neanderthals did not. This absence has often been explained away as preservation bias. Maybe their art didn't survive. Maybe we just haven't found it yet. But after more than a century of excavation, something becomes impossible to ignore. Neanderthals left almost nothing resembling symbolic obsession. They buried their dead, but without grave goods scaled to belief systems. They used pigments, but sparingly, inconsistently. They carved markings, but rarely repeated, rarely elaborated. This is not a lack of intelligence. It may be a lack of psychological need. Neanderthal brains were not smaller than ours. On average they were larger. But size alone means nothing. Organization means everything. Neuroanatomical reconstructions suggest Neanderthals devoted significant neural real estate to visual processing, spatial memory, and sensor-motor coordination. Less emphasis appears to have been placed on social abstraction, long-term symbolic projection, and myth-building, the very traits that dominate Homo sapiens' cognition. In other words, Neanderthals may have perceived the world directly, rather than through layers of story. This would explain much. Why they did not produce elaborate art traditions. Why they did not accumulate ornamental status objects. Why their culture remained stable rather than explosively creative. They were not compelled to explain existence through story. They were oriented toward function. Some anthropologists describe Neanderthal cognition as practical. Others say concrete. But those words may hide a deeper truth. Their minds may not have been shaped for belief, because belief was unnecessary. If Neanderthals originated elsewhere, within a civilization that already possessed answers about existence, cosmology, and survival, myth-making would serve no function. Myth arises where uncertainty reigns. A population raised within a technologically mature framework would not invent gods to explain lightning, death, or the sky. They would already know. In this speculative lens, Neanderthal cognition resembles a post-mythic intelligence, one that operates efficiently within known parameters, rather than constantly inventing narratives to manage fear of the unknown. This may also explain why contact with Homo sapiens proved fatal. Humans came with stories, symbols, religions, tribal identity. Neanderthals encountered a species that bonded through abstraction rather than direct utility. In small numbers, Neanderthals interbred. In large populations they dissolved. Not because they were weaker, but because their cognitive framework was incompatible with ours. A mind optimized for survival does not compete well against a mind optimized for belief. If Neanderthals were visitors, or descendants of visitors, their failure may not have been biological at all. It may have been psychological. They were not built to rule Earth. They were built to endure it. When early Homo sapiens looked at the night sky, we filled it with stories. We imagined hunters, queens, beasts, gods, shapes drawn from yearning and fear. Constellations became maps of meaning, and the heavens became a theater of myth. But Neanderthals left no such record. Not because they lacked the ability to look upward, but because they may have understood the sky too well to mythologize it. Neanderthals lived under darker skies than we can imagine. Unpolluted, sharp, crystalline. Every horizon was a planetarium. Every winter night brought a dome of ice-lit starlight stretching across glacial valleys. Their enormous visual processing regions weren't just good for forests and cliffs. They were perfect for astronomy. But here lies the unsettling part. Neanderthals show no evidence of turning the sky into mythology. No star maps. No symbolic constellations. No ritual architecture aligned to solstices. Why would a species with exceptional night vision ignore the sky? Unless it was not unfamiliar to them. If Neanderthals were a transplanted or stranded population, the stars might not have been symbols, they might have been reminders. Markers. Coordinates. Reference points from a forgotten origin. Imagine a people who know the stars scientifically, not spiritually. Imagine their cultural memory eroding over generations while the sky remains quietly familiar, stripped of its meaning but never misunderstood. This silence, this refusal to mythologize, might be the only cultural scar left from an origin older than earthly memory. Anthropologists have long puzzled over Neanderthal cave entrances oriented consistently toward sheltered valleys or prevailing winds but rarely toward astronomical events. Their alignment choices were functional, not ceremonial. It is as if the sky provided information, not inspiration. There is another mystery. Some Neanderthal sites show repeated occupation patterns seasonally calibrated with incredible precision. Migratory routes timed so consistently they imply knowledge of celestial cycles without ritualizing them. Where humans built calendars, Neanderthals simply moved. As if following instructions embedded in memory, not mythology. In this theory, Neanderthals represent a mind that remembers the sky but does not revere it. They might have retained the knowledge that stars are suns, that worlds orbit them, that the cosmos is not divine but navigable. Knowledge without a map. Memory without context. This would explain their lack of astronomical symbols. Why engrave what you already know? Why mythologize what once was machinery? To Homo sapiens, the night sky was a canvas for fear and hope. To Neanderthals, it may have been a silent reminder of something lost long before Earth became their only home. A home they may never have meant to stay on. If fossils tell one story and tools tell another, DNA tells the story that cannot be silenced. Today, every person of non-African ancestry carries fragments of Neanderthal DNA woven into their genome, pieces from a species that vanished, yet whispers through us still. These fragments are small but they are persistent. They do not behave like ordinary remnants of an extinct cousin. Some enhance immune response. Some shape fat metabolism. Some alter how our bodies process altitude, viruses, sunlight, and stress. Some affect brain development. And a few, only a few, sit in regions of the genome associated with traits we do not fully understand. To mainstream science, this is simply the legacy of interbreeding. But a closer look reveals something far stranger. First, Neanderthal DNA in humans is not evenly distributed across the genome. It clusters in regions tied to adaptation, not identity, suggesting it was retained for function, not ancestry. Certain fragments show signs of positive selection, as if they conferred survival advantages far greater than expected. Second, several crucial Neanderthal-derived genes are highly unusual in their structure. Some contain regulatory patterns rarely seen in hominin evolution, as though tuned for environmental stresses that Earth seldom provided. A few geneticists privately refer to these as orphan adaptations, traits that solve problems we cannot identify in Earth's ecological history. Why would Neanderthals evolve antiviral genes suited to pathogens never found in the Pleistocene biome? Why would their fatty acid pathways resemble adaptations suited to starvation cycles harsher than any documented ice age? Why would their pain modulation genes hint at tolerance levels beyond the requirements of terrestrial survival? Unless they originated in an environment with pressures we cannot reconstruct. And then there is the absence, perhaps the most compelling clue of all. Large sections of the modern human genome show Neanderthal exclusion zones, regions where Neanderthal DNA appears to have been blocked from integrating entirely. These aren't random. They cluster around genes linked to higher symbolic cognition, language networks, and social abstraction. It is as though two different kinds of minds were genetically incompatible at their deepest layers. Not because one was inferior, but because they were built for different purposes. Homo sapiens favored communication, coordination, imagination, the tools of a species built for expansion. Neanderthals favored sensory precision, spatial reasoning, physical resilience, the traits of a species built for survival in a harsh frontier. Their genes slide into our bodies where useful, and recoil from the places where our minds are shaped. No wonder interbreeding did not create a hybrid species. It produced absorption, careful, selective uptake. In this speculative theory, Neanderthal DNA behaves like imported technology. Pieces of a system designed elsewhere, integrated only where compatible with ours. And the most haunting part? Some Neanderthal-derived genes in modern humans are still active, still responding, still regulating, despite the conditions they were built for no longer existing. It is as if part of us is maintaining a system whose original instructions have been forgotten. A system built for a world we never knew. A world only Neanderthals remembered. Neanderthals survived everything Earth threw at them. Volcanic winters, brutal ice cycles, megafaunal extinctions, resource collapses, predators that would make modern humans freeze in place. For more than 300,000 years they endured, and often thrived, where no other hominin lineage could. Then, in a geological blink, they vanished. Official explanations feel increasingly strained. Climate change? They had already weathered worse. Competition with Homo sapiens? Early humans were fewer, weaker, and less adapted to the environments Neanderthals dominated. Interbreeding? This would dilute a population, not erase it. Disease? Possible, but unlikely to selectively eliminate only Neanderthals while sparing interacting human groups. The disappearance of Neanderthals does not follow the pattern of extinction. It follows the pattern of interruption. A stable system abruptly stops functioning not because it fails, but because its purpose has ended. The archaeological record reflects something uncanny. Neanderthal cultural signatures decline before their final disappearance, as if withdrawing, not losing. Fewer tools, fewer hearts, fewer signs of struggle. It is the quiet fate of a species that is not dying but leaving. There is a theory, quietly whispered in fringe anthropology circles, that Neanderthals did not die out at all. They were retrieved, reclaimed by the origin they once belonged to. In this hypothesis, Neanderthals were a deployed population, adapted for survival on Earth for reasons long forgotten. Perhaps a terraforming experiment. Perhaps a stranded crew. Perhaps a seed species meant to stabilize ecosystems through predation and resource cycling. Their disappearance coincides suspiciously with the rise of Homo sapiens symbolic culture and large social networks. As humans spread, the world changed, but so did something else. The skies grew quieter. Auroral events recorded in ice cores shift. Meteoric patterns alter. Strange atmospheric anomalies in the archaeological record appear and then stop abruptly around the time Neanderthals vanish. Coincidence, many say. Pattern seeking, others insist. But in this theory the timing is intentional. A returning signal. A collection event. A recall. Picture it. A species optimized for survival is deployed on a frontier world. Thrives. It adapts. It holds the line for hundreds of millennia. Then its purpose ends. The world is warming. The terrain is shifting. A new species, Homo sapiens, is rising, spreading unpredictably, changing the dynamics of the planet. Neanderthals step back. Some interbreed, merging quietly into the new dominant lineage, ensuring that fragments of their genetic system persist. Others disappear entirely, not through death but through removal. If their origins lay beyond Earth, their exit would not leave fossils, tools, or bodies. Just silence. And the sudden absence of a population that once seemed immovable. To this day we find no mass die-offs. No final migration routes. No evidence of catastrophic collapse. Only a vanishing that behaves like a completed assignment. A biological chapter closed. A species taken back. Most archaeological sites fit comfortably into the expected patterns of human prehistory. But a few, just a few, refuse to behave. A handful of Neanderthal-associated discoveries scatter across Europe and Western Asia like quiet contradictions, as though reality itself slipped for a moment and revealed something that shouldn't be there. Individually, these anomalies are curiosities. Taken together, they form a pattern far more unsettling. The first anomaly. At several sites, stone tools appear hundreds of miles away from their geological source, far beyond what Neanderthals should have transported through known migration routes. These are not random scatterings. They form linear paths as if tracking corridors or checkpoints across vast distances. To traditional archaeology, this suggests long-range mobility. But not even modern hunter-gatherers maintain routes this consistent for this long. It is as though Neanderthals followed a map no longer preserved. The second anomaly. Heat-treated stones, far beyond what simple fire exposure would cause, occasionally show microscopic signatures resembling controlled thermal gradients. Not accidental burning. Not natural wildfires. Something closer to material engineering. The temperatures required suggest knowledge Neanderthals were never credited with. Unless the knowledge wasn't originally theirs. The third anomaly. Deep cave constructions, rings of broken stalagmites arranged in circular patterns, appear at sites like Bernequal Cave. The structures predate Homo sapiens' arrival in the region. Their purpose is unknown. The arrangement is too deliberate to be random, but too featureless to connect to ritual or habitation. It looks functional. But functional for what? Some researchers describe the formations as anchors, supports, or platforms, but no one knows for what device or activity. Yet the precision of spacing and repetition suggests that whoever built them worked from memory or protocol. The fourth anomaly. Red ochre, rarely used by Neanderthals, is found concentrated unnaturally at a few sites, as though marking extraction zones or geological interest points rather than artistic expression. Ochre is a pigment to us. To a technologically oriented species, it can also be a stabilizer, a preservative, or a component in composite materials. The fifth anomaly. The apparent absence of transitional innovation. Neanderthal technology suddenly appears fully mature and remains that way like a toolkit inherited rather than developed. This mirrors the behavior of a population using fallback equipment, tools preserved from an earlier, more advanced framework. The final anomaly. Isolated archaeological signatures where Neanderthal presence should not exist based on migration timeline or climate models. Outliers, clusters that appear too early, too late, or too far away. As if small groups were deploying or relocating independent of evolutionary expansion. To mainstream archaeology, these inconsistencies are nuisances. To this speculative theory, they resemble something else. Evidence of a population engaged in tasks unrelated to human cultural development. Movements that do not align with food, safety, or climate. Constructions with no domestic or spiritual purpose. Materials manipulated in ways inconsistent with known capabilities. They resemble the faint, eroded logistical footprints of a species carrying out operations whose original context has been lost. Neanderthals did not leave written records. But they left patterns. And some of those patterns behave less like culture and more like protocol. If you follow the trail, biology that seems over-engineered, technology that appears inherited rather than invented, cognition that rejects myth, and a disappearance that behaves more like withdrawal than extinction, one idea begins to take shape. Not as fantasy, not as science fiction, but as a framework that quietly fits the evidence better than the accepted narrative. The lost colony hypothesis begins with a simple premise. Neanderthals were not a naturally evolved Earth species. They were a transplanted population, perhaps even a stranded one. Not conquerors. Not overseers. Not gods. Survivors. Imagine a civilization capable of interstellar travel. Not magical, not mystical, but deeply advanced in biology, materials science, and genetic engineering. Such a civilization would not travel with fragile bodies requiring narrow environmental windows. They would adapt themselves, or design specialized subpopulations for hostile frontier conditions. They would send colonists who could endure extreme cold, thin air, starvation cycles, toxic winds, and high radiation. Colonists whose bodies were reinforced, whose lungs were powerful, whose bones resisted breakage even under constant strain. Colonists like Neanderthals. In this model, Earth may not have been their intended destination. It may have been a diversion, an emergency landing, or an outpost meant to stabilize some unknown objective. The exact purpose is lost to deep time. But what remains aligns with the traces they left behind. Hyper-efficient survival physiology. Standardized, conservative technology optimized for reliability over innovation. Quiet cognition focused on perception rather than imagination. A genetic system that integrates into humans only where beneficial. A disappearance with no signs of struggle. If Neanderthals were a lost or abandoned colony, their stability makes sense. A stranded population would cling to fixed protocols rather than invent new ones. Their descendants would continue the routines long after the purpose had faded. Their toolkits would become ritualized, preserved without understanding their original engineering intent. Generations would pass. Cultural memory would erode. Their connection to the stars would shift from knowledge to instinct. What once was navigation would become nothing more than a quiet familiarity with the night sky. And then Homo sapiens emerged, not physically superior but cognitively foreign. Symbol making. Story spinning. Endlessly inventive and endlessly unpredictable. A different kind of intelligence. From the perspective of a stranded colony, early humans may have represented instability, change, noise in a system meant to remain stable. Then something else occurred, something archaeology cannot record. A signal may have returned. A rescue. A recall. Or perhaps a retrieval of biological assets left too long on an unintended world. Whatever happened, Neanderthals vanished not like a dying species, but like a population lifted out of the landscape almost overnight. Those who remained interbred, leaving behind fragments, useful modules, woven into our genome. Their culture ended. Their purpose ended. But their biology lives on. We walk the earth with pieces of them inside us. Pieces of a colony that came from somewhere else. Pieces of a story whose opening chapters were written under alien suns. The lost colony hypothesis does not claim certainty. It simply asks us to look at the evidence without forcing it into a familiar shape. What if Neanderthals were not our cousins? What if they were our predecessors? What if Earth was never their home? And what if the only reason we remain here is because they left? If the lost colony hypothesis holds even a fragment of truth, then the story of Neanderthals does not end with their disappearance. It ends with us. Modern humans carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA, numbers that appear small but influence systems far more significant than their proportion suggests. These fragments are strategic, not random. They shape how we fight pathogens, endure cold, metabolize fats, process stress, and regulate sleep. They influence aspects of our neurological wiring, pain thresholds, sensory acuity, spatial memory. It is as if nature, or something else, selected precisely which parts of the Neanderthal biological system should remain functional inside a new host lineage. A lineage that would not remain on the margins but expand across the planet. In this speculative theory, Neanderthals do not vanish at all. They transform. They are subsumed into Homo sapiens, leaving behind what can best be described as upgrades, modular genetic components that enhance human survivability. Not domination. Not replacement. Integration. If Neanderthals were a stranded colony, then modern humans became the continuation of their mission, whether intentional or accidental. We carry forward their durability, their resistance, their practicality, even if layered beneath our own symbolic and technological complexity. And this raises a quiet, almost unsettling question. Did they leave traces inside us intentionally? Or was this simply the final act of a species merging with the only viable future it had on this world? Humans expanded rapidly after Neanderthals disappeared. Too rapidly, some argue. As if something in us changed, something subtle but powerful, that enabled vast migrations, cold endurance, higher fertility, and niche mastery unprecedented in primate evolution. Part of that advantage may have been ours all along. But part of it may have been theirs. A legacy of a world that was never Earth. A survival blueprint coded into our bodies. Even today, certain Neanderthal-derived genes activate under environmental stress. Cold exposure, high-altitude viral outbreaks. They awaken, performing tasks whose original purpose is lost to the ages. It is as though pieces of an ancient program still run quietly in the background of our biology. A program designed for frontier survival. A program built for a harsher world. And perhaps the most striking part is psychological. Humans often feel a deep, unspoken pull toward the rugged, the remote, the extreme, the mountains, the tundra, the dark forests where silence rules. A fascination with endurance. A reverence for the wild. It may be cultural. It may be myth. It may be coincidence. Or it may be memory. The last whisper of a species whose purpose was to withstand whatever the universe demanded of it. If Neanderthals were extraterrestrial in origin, colonists, scouts, or refugees, then modern humans are not merely their descendants. We are their legacy. Their adaptation carried forward. Their strengths woven into a new kind of being, one capable not only of surviving Earth but of one day leaving it. The story does not end with them. It continues with us. And as our species looks once more toward the stars, mapping, exploring, imagining, we might be following an impulse older than our civilization. Older than our species. Older even than Earth's memory of those who came before. Perhaps when humanity eventually reaches another world, windswept, frozen, distant, we will feel a strange familiarity. Not because we evolved for it, but because part of us has been there before.